This story explores the heartbreak and transformation of a mother who receives a painful message from her only son. He will not care for her in her old age. As she faces loneliness, betrayal, and the collapse of her expectations, she must find the strength to rebuild her life, rediscover her self-worth, and redefine what family means. In a world where generational bonds are tested and the meaning of duty is changing, this is a story about letting go, healing, and the courage to choose yourself. The script will immerse viewers in a deeply relatable, fact-based family drama, using FOMO triggers like the message that changed everything, the moment she finally says no, and the decision made in minutes that will change decades. The goal is to keep the audience emotionally invested with rising tension, a clear turning point, and a satisfying, empowering resolution. I never thought my own son would say those words to me. For years, I believed that the bond between a mother and her child was unbreakable, forged in sleepless nights, scraped knees, and whispered prayers. My life had been built around the certainty that, no matter what storms came, my son and I would always have each other. That belief was my anchor, my comfort, and my pride. But all of that changed the day I opened my phone and saw his message. A message that would shatter my sense of security and force me to confront a reality I never wanted to face. It was a simple text, but its meaning was devastating. "Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I have my own life and family now." I read it once, then again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the words were clear, each one a cold blade. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I was seeing. Was this really my son, the boy I had raised with so much love, the young man I had sacrificed everything for? I felt a wave of shock, then hurt, then a deep, aching emptiness that settled in my chest. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move. Memories flooded my mind. His first steps, his laughter, the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the dreams I had for his future. I thought of all the times I had put his needs before my own, believing that one day, when I was old and frail, he would be there for me as I had been for him. Now, that hope was gone, replaced by a sense of abandonment I had never known. As the reality of his words sank in, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The security I had always felt was gone, replaced by a new and frightening uncertainty. I was alone, not just in my home, but in my heart. And as I sat in the silence, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey I never wanted to take. A journey from security to abandonment, from certainty to the unknown. I gave him everything. How did we end up here? My story, like so many mothers, is woven from threads of hope and sacrifice. I was a young woman when my world changed forever. My husband, the man I thought I'd grow old with, left us before our son could even say Abba. Suddenly, I was alone, a single mother in a world that didn't make it easy for women like me. But I was determined that my son would never feel the absence of a father. I worked 2 jobs, teaching at the local school by day, sewing clothes for neighbors by night. Every rupee I earned went to his school fees, his books, his shoes. I skipped meals so he could eat well, wore old clothes so he could have new ones, and never let him see the worry that kept me awake at night. From the very beginning, my son was my world. I celebrated every small victory, his first word, his first step, his first day at school. I was there for every scraped knee, every fever, every heartbreak. I taught him to be kind, to work hard, to respect others. I told him stories of courage and resilience, hoping he would grow up to be strong and compassionate. I dreamed of the day he would become a man I could be proud of, a man who would remember the sacrifices his mother made. As he grew older, the challenges only multiplied. There were days when I didn't know how I would pay the rent or put food on the table, but I never let him see my fear. I wanted him to feel safe, to believe that the world was full of possibilities. I cheered him on at every school event, helped him with his homework, and listened to his dreams for the future. When he struggled, I was his anchor. When he succeeded, I was his biggest fan. I remember the day he graduated from college. I sat in the audience, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed with pride. All the years of struggle, all the sleepless nights, felt worth it in that moment. I thought, this is it. This is the reward for all my sacrifices. I imagined a future where he would build a good life, find happiness, and maybe, just maybe, remember to take care of his old mother when the time came. When he got married, I welcomed his wife into our home with open arms. I wanted her to feel the same love and acceptance I had always given my son. I tried to be the mother-in-law I wished I'd had, supportive, understanding, never interfering. I hoped that our family would grow stronger, that my son would find in his marriage the partnership and joy I had lost so long ago. But as the years passed, I began to notice small changes. My son called less often, visited only on holidays, and seemed distracted when he was with me. His wife was polite but distant, always busy with her own family, her own friends. I told myself it was normal, that children grow up and build their own lives. But deep down, I felt a growing emptiness, a sense that I was being left behind. Still, I held on to hope. I believed that love and sacrifice would be enough, that my son would remember all I had done for him. I imagined that, when I grew old and needed help, he would be there for me, just as I had always been there for him. I never imagined that the day would come when he would write those words, when he would tell me that I was no longer his responsibility. Now, as I look back on the years of hope and hard work, I am forced to confront a painful truth. Love does not always guarantee loyalty, and sacrifice does not always earn gratitude. I gave him everything, my time, my energy, my dreams. But somewhere along the way, the bond we shared was stretched too thin, and I am left wondering how, after a lifetime of giving, I ended up here, alone, disappointed, and searching for answers. It started with missed calls and ended with silence. In the early years, my son and I were inseparable. He would come home from school, drop his bag, and tell me every detail of his day. We laughed over silly jokes, shared secrets, and found comfort in each other's company. Even as he grew into a teenager, I tried to keep our bond strong, cooking his favorite meals, listening to his music, and giving him space when he needed it. I believed that love, patience, and understanding would be enough to keep us close, no matter how much the world changed around us. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The phone calls became less frequent. At first, he would call every evening, then only on weekends, and eventually, weeks would pass without a word. When I called him, he was always busy, at work with friends, or just too tired to talk. Our conversations grew shorter, filled with polite but distant words. I told myself he was just busy building his own life, that this was what good mothers wanted for their children: independence, success, happiness. But in the quiet moments, I felt the ache of separation growing inside me. Family gatherings became more strained. He would arrive late, leave early, and spend most of his time on his phone. His wife, though always courteous, seemed eager to keep him moving, as if our home was just another stop on a long list of obligations. I tried to make things easier, offering to help with their children, planning meals around their schedules, never complaining when they canceled at the last minute. But no matter how hard I tried, I felt myself slipping further and further from the center of his world. I noticed the little things first. The way he stopped asking for my advice, the way he forgot my birthday, the way he no longer looked me in the eye when we spoke. I tried to ignore the sting, to remind myself that he was an adult now, with his own responsibilities and dreams. But the distance between us grew wider with every passing year. I watched as he built a new life, one that no longer seemed to have room for me. I tried to hold the family together, organizing dinners, sending messages, and reaching out whenever I could. Sometimes he would respond with a quick, "Thanks, Amy," but more often, there was only silence. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if I had failed him in some way. I replayed old conversations in my mind, searching for the moment when things changed. But I could never find it. The truth was, there was no single moment, just a slow, steady drift that left me feeling more alone than I had ever been. As the years went by, I realized that closeness is not guaranteed by blood or history. It must be nurtured, protected, and cherished. I tried to bridge the gap, but sometimes, no matter how hard you reach, the other person is already too far away. The pain of separation is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is the quietest ache, the emptiest chair at the table, the unanswered call that lingers long after the phone stops ringing. And so, I learned to live with the silence, even as I longed for the closeness we once shared. Some words can never be taken back. I sat with my son's message burning in my mind, the pain of his words echoing louder with every passing hour. I knew I couldn't let this wound fester in silence. I needed to hear his voice, to look into his eyes, to understand how the boy I raised with so much love could become the man who wrote those words. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. When he answered, his voice was casual, almost distracted, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I asked him to come over to talk face to face. He hesitated, but finally agreed. When he arrived, he stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression guarded. I tried to smile to break the ice, but the weight of what needed to be said hung heavy between us. I took a deep breath and handed him my phone, the message still open on the screen. "Did you mean this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at the message, then looked away. "Amy, I didn't mean to hurt you. I have my own life now, my own family. You can't expect me to be there for everything." His words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I never asked you to give up your life," I said quietly. "I only hoped that after everything we've been through, you would remember where you came from. That you would remember who stood by you when no one else did." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "It's not that simple, Amy. Things are different now. I have responsibilities. I can't be everywhere at once." I nodded, trying to understand, but the hurt was too raw. "I know you have your own life. I want you to be happy, but I never thought I would become a burden to you. I never thought you would say those words to me." The silence between us was thick, filled with all the things we wanted to say, but couldn't. I remembered the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the sacrifices I made so he could have a better life, the dreams I had for our family. I wondered if any of it mattered now, or if it had all been forgotten in the rush of adulthood and new priorities. He finally looked at me, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry, Amy. I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted. I need space. I need to focus on my own family." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I understand, but you need to understand something too. Family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about respect, about love, about being there for each other even when it's hard." He was quiet for a long time, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I'll try to do better," he said at last, "but I can't promise things will go back to the way they were." I smiled sadly. "I'm not asking for things to be the same. I'm just asking for honesty, for kindness, for a little bit of the love we used to share." As he left, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. The conversation had been raw and painful, but it was also necessary. We had both spoken our truths, and while the wounds were still fresh, I knew that silence would have been far worse. Some words can never be taken back, but sometimes speaking them is the only way to begin healing. When you lose your family, you lose your anchor. In the days after our confrontation, I felt as if I were floating in a vast, empty sea, untethered, unseen, and uncertain of where I belonged. The house that once echoed with laughter and the clatter of daily life now felt cavernous and cold. I wandered from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, straightening picture frames, searching for some trace of the warmth that had once filled these walls. But everything felt hollow, as if the very spirit of my home had left with my son's words. Loneliness settled over me like a heavy blanket. I tried to distract myself with chores, with television, with the endless scroll of my phone, but nothing could fill the silence. Meals became a solitary ritual, one plate, one cup, one chair at the table. I found myself talking to the walls, to the faded photographs, to the memories that clung to every corner. Sometimes, I would catch myself listening for the sound of my son's footsteps, hopping for a call or a message that never came. Friends and neighbors noticed the change in me. Some reached out with gentle sympathy, inviting me for tea or offering to help with errands. Their kindness warmed me, but it also made me feel exposed, as if my pain were on display for the whole world to see. Others were less kind, whispering behind my back, speculating about what I must have done to drive my own son away. Their judgment stung, adding shame to the loneliness I already carried. I tried to confide in a few close friends, but even their well-meaning advice felt hollow. "He'll come around," they said. "All children go through phases." But I knew this was different. This wasn't a phase, it was a fracture, a break in the foundation of my life. I began to question my worth, to wonder if I had failed as a mother, if I was somehow to blame for the distance that had grown between us. I replayed every decision, every argument, every moment of anger or impatience, searching for the mistake that had cost me my family. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with the shame and sadness. I was angry at my son for his words, at my daughter-in-law for her coldness, at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I was angry at a world that seemed to value independence over loyalty, that taught children to chase their own dreams at the expense of those who raised them. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make someone, anyone, understand the depth of my hurt. Yet even in my isolation, I found small moments of comfort. A neighbor's child brought me flowers from the garden. An old friend sent a letter, reminding me of the strength I had shown in the past. I realized that while I had lost my anchor, I was not completely adrift. There were still people who cared, still connections that could be rebuilt, still hope for a different kind of family, one built not on obligation, but on choice and mutual respect. As I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I began to understand that my worth was not defined by my son's approval or anyone else's judgment. I was more than the roles I had played, more than the sacrifices I had made. I was a woman who had loved deeply, who had given everything, and who still had the strength to start again. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I was determined to find my way, no longer anchored by the past, but guided by the hope of a new beginning. The day I stopped waiting for him was the day I found myself. It didn't happen all at once, but in a series of small, almost invisible moments that slowly gathered strength. For weeks, I had lived in a fog of disappointment, replaying my son's words and wondering if I would ever feel whole again. I moved through my days on autopilot, haunted by the echo of his message and the emptiness of a house that no longer felt like home. But one morning, as I sat by the window watching the sun rise over the quiet street, something inside me shifted. I realized I had spent too long waiting for someone else to make me feel valued, too long hopping for an apology that would never come. I was tired of living in the shadow of someone else's choices. I wanted to step into the light of my own life. That morning, I made a promise to myself. I would stop waiting for my son to come back, and I would start living for myself. It was a simple vow, but it changed everything. I began by reaching out to people I had lost touch with, old friends, distant relatives, even neighbors I had only ever waved to in passing. I joined a local women's group that met every week at the community center. At first, I was nervous, unsure if I belonged. But as I listened to the stories of other women, stories of loss, resilience, and new beginnings, I realized I was not alone. My pain was not unique, and neither was my hope. The group became a lifeline. We shared our struggles and our triumphs, our fears and our dreams. I found comfort in their laughter, strength in their advice, and inspiration in their courage. I started volunteering at the center, helping organize events and support groups for women facing similar challenges. The work gave me purpose, a reason to get out of bed each morning, and a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I discovered that I had skills and wisdom to offer, that my experiences, both good and bad, could help others find their own way. As I built new connections, I also began to rediscover old passions. I dusted off my sewing machine and started making quilts for the local shelter. I spent afternoons in the library, losing myself in books I had always meant to read. I took long walks in the park, breathing in the fresh air and letting the rhythm of my footsteps quiet my mind. Slowly, the ache in my chest began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that grew stronger with each passing day. I learned to enjoy my own company, to savor the freedom of making choices just for myself. I cooked meals I loved, played music that made me dance, and filled my home with flowers simply because they made me smile. I stopped measuring my worth by my son's approval or anyone else's expectations. I realized that I was enough, just as I was, flaws and all. The turning point came when I was invited to speak at the women's group about my journey. Standing in front of a room full of strangers, I shared my story, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the anger, and finally, the decision to choose myself. I spoke about the day I stopped waiting for my son, the day I decided to reclaim my life. As I spoke, I saw nods of understanding, tears of empathy, and smiles of encouragement. I realized that my story was not just mine. It was the story of every woman who has ever felt invisible, unappreciated, or alone. After the meeting, women came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to tell me that my words had given them hope. In that moment, I understood the true power of choosing yourself. It's not about giving up on others, but about refusing to give up on yourself. It's about finding the strength to move forward, even when the past tries to hold you back. It's about building a life that is rich with meaning, connection, and joy, no matter who chooses to walk beside you. I still think of my son, and there are days when the ache returns. But I no longer let it define me. I have learned that love is not about sacrifice without end, but about honoring your own needs and boundaries. I have learned that hope is not about waiting for someone else to change, but about finding the courage to change yourself. And I have learned that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to live fully, bravely, and unapologetically. The day I stopped waiting for him was the day I found myself. And in finding myself, I discovered a world of possibility I never knew existed. I am no longer just a mother or a woman left behind. I am a survivor, a friend, a mentor, and most importantly, the author of my own story. Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. After the turning point in my life, I realized that the emptiness left by my son's absence didn't have to be a void forever. It could be a space for something new, something better. I began to look at the world with fresh eyes, searching for connection and meaning beyond the boundaries of blood. The pain of loss was still there, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became the soil in which new growth could take root. I started by reaching out to the women I'd met at the community center. We began meeting not just for support groups, but for tea, for walks in the park, for evenings spent sharing stories and laughter. These women, each carrying her own scars and secrets, became my sisters in spirit. We celebrated birthdays, comforted each other through setbacks, and cheered for every small victory. In their company, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. We were a patchwork family, stitched together by empathy and understanding, stronger for our differences and our shared resilience. As my circle grew, so did my confidence. I volunteered at the local library, helping children discover the magic of books. I joined a gardening club, where my hands, once busy with chores for others, now coaxed life from the earth for my own joy. I learned to paint, to dance, to cook new recipes just because I wanted to. Each new experience was a reminder that life could still surprise me, that happiness could bloom in the most unexpected places. Forgiveness was the hardest lesson of all. For a long time, I held on to anger and disappointment, replaying my son's words and my own regrets. But as I built my new life, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of the past. I learned to forgive my son, not because he had asked for it, but because I refused to let his choices dictate my happiness. I forgave myself, too, for the mistakes I had made, for the times I had stayed silent when I should have spoken, for loving so deeply that I lost sight of my own needs. With forgiveness came a new sense of value. I stopped measuring my worth by my role as a mother or by anyone else's approval. I discovered that I was enough, just as I was. I found joy in my own company, in the quiet mornings spent with a cup of tea and a good book, in the satisfaction of a garden well tended, in the laughter shared with friends who saw me for who I truly was. I realized that my life was not over because one chapter had ended. In fact, a new story was just beginning. Old wounds didn't disappear, but they faded, replaced by the scars of survival and the pride of having rebuilt my life from the ground up. I learned to cherish the memories of happier times without letting them hold me back. I kept photos of my son and his family on the mantle, not as a shrine to what was lost, but as a reminder of the love that had once been real. I sent birthday cards and holiday wishes, not expecting a reply, but hoping that one day the lines of communication might reopen. In the meantime, I poured my energy into the relationships that nourished me. I became a mentor to younger women at the community center, sharing my story and encouraging them to find their own strength. I organized potlucks and movie nights, turning my small apartment into a haven of warmth and laughter. I reached out to neighbors, offering help when I could and accepting it when I needed it. Slowly, the isolation that had once threatened to consume me was replaced by a vibrant network of support. The greatest gift of this new life was the realization that family is not just about blood. It's about the people who show up, who listen, who care. It's about the bonds we choose to nurture, the kindness we give and receive, the love that grows in unexpected places. Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. I found sisters, daughters, and friends in the most unlikely corners of my world, and together, we built something beautiful out of brokenness. Looking back, I see that loss and growth are two sides of the same coin. The pain of being left behind made space for new beginnings, for deeper connections, for a life that was truly my own. I am no longer defined by what I have lost, but by what I have found: strength, joy, and the courage to keep moving forward. My story is not one of abandonment, but of resilience and renewal. And as I look around at the family I have chosen, I know that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Your worth is not defined by who stays, but by how you rise. As I look back on the winding road that brought me here, I see not just the pain and regret, but the wisdom and healing that grew from those wounds. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant giving everything: my time, my energy, my dreams, without ever asking for anything in return. I thought that love was measured by sacrifice, that silence was a sign of strength, and that my value depended on how much I could endure for the sake of my family. But life, in its harshest moments, taught me a different lesson: that boundaries are not walls, but bridges to healthier relationships, and that self-respect is the foundation of every true connection. Regret is a heavy burden, and for a long time, I carried it everywhere. I regretted not speaking up sooner, not insisting on my place in the family, not teaching my son that kindness and respect are not optional. I regretted every moment I let myself be pushed aside, every time I swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. But pain, I have discovered, is also a teacher. It forced me to confront the truth about my relationships, to see clearly where love had turned into obligation, and where giving had become enabling. I learned that it is not selfish to set boundaries, to say no, to demand respect. In fact, it is the only way to ensure that love remains a gift, not a burden. Healing began the day I chose to value myself. It was not easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories of laughter and togetherness haunted me like ghosts. But slowly, I learned to forgive, not just my family, but myself. I forgave myself for believing that my worth depended on others, for staying silent when I should have spoken, for loving so much that I forgot to love myself. Forgiveness was the key that unlocked the door to my own freedom. The most important lesson I learned is that boundaries are not about shutting people out, but about inviting the right people in. By setting limits, I taught my family how to treat me, and I taught myself that I deserved better. Respect is not about fear or control. It is about honesty, empathy, and mutual understanding. When I finally spoke up, I discovered a strength I never knew I had, and I found that others respected me more, not less, for standing my ground. To every mother listening who feels invisible, unappreciated, or afraid to speak her truth, I want you to know you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your feelings are valid. It is never too late to change the rules, to demand respect, and to reclaim your place in the world. The journey may be hard, and the cost may be high, but the reward is a life lived with dignity and self-worth. As I close this chapter, I do so with hope. Hope that my story will inspire others to find their own strength, to set their own boundaries, and to believe in their own value. Pain may be inevitable, but healing is possible. Regret may linger, but wisdom endures. And in the end, your worth is not defined by who stays, but by how you rise. Your story matters. Share it, and let's heal together. As I close this chapter of my journey, I want to reach out to every woman, every mother, every person who has ever felt alone in their pain. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you felt invisible in your own home, or struggled to find your voice in a world that too often asks women to stay silent. Maybe you've faced betrayal, loneliness, or the heartbreak of being pushed aside by those you love most. Or maybe you're just searching for a place where your experiences are understood and your feelings are honored. Auntie's living room is more than just a channel. It's a community built on empathy, courage, and the belief that every voice deserves to be heard. Here, we don't judge or shame. We listen, we support, and we learn from one another. I invite you to share your own journey in the comments below. Tell us about the moment you found your strength, the lesson you learned, or the boundary you set that changed your life. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs to take their first step toward healing. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe to Auntie's Living Room for more real-life stories, lessons, and conversations that matter. Like this video if you believe in the power of honesty and self-respect. Share it with a friend or family member who might need a reminder that they are not alone. And most importantly, keep the conversation going, because every time we speak up, we make it easier for others to do the same. Together, we can create a space where silence is replaced by sharing, where isolation gives way to community, and where every woman, every mother, every daughter, and every friend knows that her story is valued. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this journey. Remember, your story matters. Share it and let's heal together. Let's build a world where no one has to face their struggles alone, and where every voice, no matter how quiet, can help change the rules for the better. Subscribe, comment, and join the conversation. This is Auntie's living room, and you are always welcome here.